Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you guys are having a good Friday. And I want to expand a little bit on something that we learned yesterday. I did mention this yesterday in the injury video. Obviously, pretty much everybody knows about this now, but I want to go ahead and get into this a little bit more than just saying, oh, Bryce Young is out and Andy Dalton's going to be starting against us because the implications of this are pretty big, right? Like that's a quarterback. That's a guy who's touching the ball on virtually every single offensive snap the Panthers have. He is going to touch the ball 60 to 70 times in all likelihood in our game. So it's definitely something that needs to be discussed in detail because you could not have two more different quarterbacks. These two guys, polar opposites in just about every way imaginable. And we've been thinking about playing Bryce Young in week 3 since the moment he was drafted. We were like, okay, we're playing the Panthers week 3. They take Bryce Young, and you're like, okay, that's who we're going to get a look at here. Not so. Now you're getting Andy Dalton, and it's going to require a completely different game plan. And also, it's going to bring with it a different set of expectations, I think, because I've seen a lot of Seahawks fans already say some variation of, I think this actually helps the Panthers. I think this is actually going to make it more likely the Panthers win because Andy Dalton has a good record against the Seahawks. He's 3-1 lifetime against the Seahawks, I believe. He's put up pretty good numbers against the Seahawks. He's a backup quarterback, and he's a veteran backup quarterback. He's the kind of backup quarterback the Seahawks typically have problems with. These guys who aren't really all that anymore, but they have veteran experience. They're smart enough to get the job done. They can play competently, and you put all that stuff together in a blender, and you have the kind of quarterback that gives the Seahawks problems, kind of Colt McCoy style. And Andy Dalton is definitely more accomplished than Colt McCoy. He's definitely had a much better career. So a lot of people are putting this all together and they're saying, well, Andy Dalton poses a bigger problem for the Seahawks than Bryce Young does. And I think I agree. I will say that. I think I agree with that assessment. Obviously, you're losing something with Andy Dalton. Don't get me wrong. You are losing something, and you are opening up possibilities for this Seahawks defense to do things they maybe wouldn't have been able to do against Bryce Young, but you're also adding some stuff that is really valuable. However, is that necessarily going to carry over in this game? So, in theory, on paper, you're talking about Young versus Dalton. Young, he gives you mobility, he gives you some playmaking with his legs, he gives you the ability to improvise. He's got a more live arm at this point in his career, but Dalton is smarter. Dalton is probably better at playing within a structure. Dalton is probably better at reading an NFL defense and taking what that defense will give him. He's probably got more awareness of what it's going to take to win this particular game. It's not going to be about scrambling around, breaking 8 tackles in the backfield, and then launching the ball 70 yards for some ridiculous triple coverage touchdown. It's going to be about going 6 yards at a time down the field. Andy Dalton probably has a better understanding of that, has a better chance of keeping his head on straight when he's out there, and actually executing a game plan that is methodical and has a high probability of succeeding. Whereas Bryce Young gives you some stuff that is more explosive, gives you some stuff that is more creative, and it has a lower chance of succeeding and is more likely to end in things like negative plays and turnovers. That's, of course, in theory. Andy Dalton is about to turn 36. And obviously, he's already in a different phase of his career. But here's what could be coming. Here's what we don't know about. Is he in the final stage of his career yet? I'm talking about you got a good quarterback in Andy Dalton. And at one point, he was a good quarterback. He was a very good quarterback. He had 1 year he was in the MVP race. And then you go down a notch to where you're just another quarterback. Then you go another notch down to where you're a backup quarterback. That's where Andy Dalton is as of right now. You're a good backup quarterback. So good, in fact, that you can step in for Jameis Winston last year and play okay. Andy Dalton, you look at the numbers, played okay last year. QB rating of 95.2. He was in an offense that was able to give him a decent amount of stuff to work with. But you look at what Andy Dalton did last year, he was solid. He wasn't good enough to get the Saints to the playoffs. He wasn't good enough to get the Saints to a winning record, but he was respectable. And if you were to make a list of the things that held the Saints back from being a good team last year, Dalton would not have been that high on that list. So he is kind of in that phase of his career. But now that he's about to turn 36, is he going to now be in the final phase of his career where there's just no arm strength left? There's just no zip on the ball at all. There's no mobility. And he just has nothing except his brain. Think Brad Johnson in 2008. Think something like that, where you've just got so little to work with. Is Andy Dalton in that phase of his career? That's where we're just going to have to wait to find out because we haven't seen him this year. Last time we saw him last year, he was playing pretty decently. But at this age, the final cliff can come at any time. And honestly, it kind of looked like that cliff had come for him in 2021 when he had that pretty bad year for the Bears, when he actually played almost half the season, didn't play well at all. It seemed like he was there, and then last year he kind of redeemed himself a little bit with a respectable season. And now we're here again wondering, now that he's on this Panthers team that doesn't have a very good offensive line, that doesn't have very good receivers because they had to give up their best receiver to get Bryce Young in the first place, that doesn't have, I mean, I guess Miles Sanders is a pretty good running back, right? But they don't have the hammers that they had last year, even with Foreman. Foreman's gone. So you're now working with nearly as much as you were in New Orleans. And what you had in New Orleans wasn't exactly amazing, but it was definitely better than what you got right now in Carolina. You had Chris Olave, you had Alvin Kamara. This year you've got DJ Chark and Jonathan Mingo and I guess Miles Sanders. And we've already seen that there's some stuff that has been stripped from him. Like you look at his rushing numbers. Andy Dalton was never a great runner, but over the last 2 years in particular, he's become a complete non-factor with his legs. He is completely a one-dimensional player. Last year, he had 54 rushing yards in 14 games. So that's not a part of his game he can access anymore. Back in his prime, he could give you a tiny bit. Not a lot, but he could give you a tiny bit. Little bit of a threat to move around and do some things with his legs. Now it's an absolute last resort. And even if he could physically do it, he doesn't want to do it because he's going to get hurt. So you're looking at what happened last year. I know that's kind of the other thing people are going to bring up. Where Andy Dalton, we played the Saints with Andy Dalton starting last year in New Orleans, and the Saints won. Of course, you really look at it, Andy Dalton didn't play particularly well. He played okay. 16 to 24, 187 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 1 sack taken, 7 carries for 4 yards. So that tells you that even last year he wasn't much of a threat with his legs. The reason why the Saints won this game was mostly their rushing attack. They ran for over 235 yards. Or, excuse me, exactly 235 yards. Taysom Hill probably killed us more than Andy Dalton did. The Panthers do not have a Taysom Hill. The Panthers have nothing even remotely close to a Taysom Hill. So I don't necessarily dread this matchup. I don't have any terrible feelings about it. I think that if you take a look at the actual, if you take a look at how the sausage was made, it's not as bad as you think. You want to go back 4 or 5 years to when we played the Bengals in 2019 and Andy Dalton threw for 400 on us. Yeah, that was bad. He gave us problems. He threw all over us. He had maybe, I don't know if it was the last great game of his career, but it was probably the last game of his career where he had 400 passing yards. But that was a different Andy Dalton. That was an Andy Dalton who still had his arm. That was an Andy Dalton who still had, I mean, not a ton of mobility, but more mobility than he has now. So you put it all together, and I don't think we're going to be dealing with an Andy Dalton that is on the level of the Andy Dalton who's beat us up before, or even potentially the Andy Dalton that played okay against us last year. Now, that doesn't change the fact that we've had problems with this type of quarterback before. The decent veteran who's going to be smart enough to take what we give him and just kind of work his way slowly down the field, avoid turnovers, avoid risky plays, and just hope it works out at the end. Colt McCoy style, right? So, what I will say is this. You're playing against Andy Dalton minus any real mobility. Like, he is not going to be running around back there. He's not going to make a bunch of stuff happen with his legs. So, the game plan against Bryce Young, which had to be run a lot of zone defense, kind of needs to go out the door. That's the main thing I'm looking for. We saw very little man defense against the Rams. We saw it start to get ramped up a little bit against the Lions. Keep ramping it up. You can go to man defense on Andy Dalton and force him to make super accurate throws to beat you. I know we're not going to have Woolen, and that's really unfortunate. If we had Woolen and Witherspoon, I think we could completely shut this Carolina passing attack out. I think we could just skunk them. But without Woolen, it's a little different. But I still want to see aggressiveness on this defense. Force Dalton to make hard throws. Force Dalton to try to throw it down the field. See if he can do it. I remember Brad Johnson back in 2008. He would try to throw it deep. The ball took 15 minutes, it felt like, to land on the ground, and you had all day to get underneath it and break it up or pick it off. Dalton might be at that phase of his career. He never had the best arm anyway, but his arm was good at one point. Is it still now? Last year it was okay, but at this age, it can just go. It can go very quickly. This isn't Tom Brady we're talking about here. It's not going to just stay at a good level forever. So I want to see some aggressiveness. I want to see forcing Dalton to beat us deep. If we do those things, I think we'll be fine. There is a reason why this type of quarterback has given the Seahawks problems before. Do something to address those reasons and make sure it doesn't happen again. And I think we'll be fine. But that's how I see this whole Andy Dalton, Bryce Young dichotomy. Let me know what you guys think. I'm going to get out of here. See you guys later. More videos later. Go Hawks.